Right, Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. Let's see who else is coming. There's Riaz, San, Jeff, Wayne, Nate. All right, everybody. How's everybody doing? Hope everybody is good. Before we get started, I actually want to finish a thought during the conversation that Hossein and I had last week, because I think this is a very important issue and it kind of lingers over some of the things that we will be talking about in this next Ishraq of the wisdom of the throne, and that is the question of morality vis-a-vis the wujudi perspective. And so let's recap everything that we said in that conversation by me asserting the following. At the level of God as God, God qua God, right? Because we cannot assert subject and object because subject and object denotes duality, therefore, by shorthand, we can say that there is no morality at that level of uh, God qua God or Allah bimal Allah. If anybody's ever formulated it that way, being qua being or God qua God. So at that level, there is the question of morality becomes irrelevant because of this um, negation of subject and object in the way that we understand it from this perspective of the Isalat al-Wujud, the primacy of being. However, the issue still remains that one of the names of God, or many of the names of God, but one in particular that I have in mind is Al-Bar, which means the all good. So um, that question of morality then, kind of becomes relevant by inference that because this name of God, one of the attributes of God, is the all good, then therefore the primacy of morality, or rather than primacy of morality, the fundamental predicate of morality derives from the all good. So by the existential nature of God as the all good, then what we can posit as being right or correct on one level of analysis from this Wujudi perspective is the good in itself. And then the question becomes, well, what is that in its particular instances? And I think this is where then what I said last week becomes very relevant insofar as we're talking about, the relativity of things, but, the question is, at what point can human beings discover what is good and what is bad in a given situation? And I think that the argument remains that on the one hand, we can say that since God is the principle of all things, then we can discover the good by virtue of discovering God. But then what are the instances of that, the particular instances that appear to us? And that I assert that we can only figure that out in the moment in a social trajectory or a phenomenal trajectory of what that is that manifests as the good, right? And then, there are further questions that we can then kind of explore and extrapolate from that. But this is how I sort of, in a very roundabout, shorthand kind of way, resolve that question. We can get into it after I finish these two short sections of this next section of ours. The second place of illumination concerning the knowledge of the return, which is, I think, this whole section is very important. And it's a little bit less dense than the first section of the first Ishraq that we read before. Okay, so let's get started. The first illumination concerning the inner knowledge of the soul. Number one, principle concerning the failure of earlier philosophers and the necessity of illumination in this area. He says, know that the inner knowledge of the soul is one of those extremely difficult fields of knowledge in which the philosophers, not to mention the mere dialecticians, by this he means both the Mutakallimun and also to some degree the Peripatetics, were exceedingly neglectful despite the length of their investigations, the power of their thought, and the frequency of their endeavors in this field. For this knowledge can only be acquired through illumination from the lamp niche of prophecy and all the following the lights of revelation and prophethood and the lanterns of the book and the tradition that has come down to us in the path of our imams, masters of guidance and infallibility from their ancestor, the seal of the prophets. May the greatest of blessings and prayers of those who pray be upon him and upon the other prophets and messengers. Number 2, principle concerning the levels of the soul. This human soul has many levels and stations from the beginning of its generation to the end of its goal, and it has certain essential states and modes of being. At first, in its state of connection with the body, it is a corporeal substance. Here we have the intellecti of Aristotle. Then it gradually becomes more and more intensified and develops through the different stages of its natural constitution until it subsists by itself and moves from this world to the other world and so returns to its Lord. Thus, the soul is originated in a corporeal state, but endures in a spiritual state. The first thing to be generated in its state of connection with the body is a corporeal power. Next is a natural form, then the sensible soul with its levels, then the cogitative and recollective, and then the rational soul, the nafs an-natiqa. Next, after the practical intellect, it acquires the theoretical intellect according to its various degrees, from the rank of the intellect in potency to that of the intellect in actuality and the active intellect, which is the same as the spirit or ruh of the divine command, which is ascribed to God in his saying, say the spirit is from the command of my Lord, or qul ar-ruh min amri rabbi. This last degree occurs only in a very few small number of individuals of the human species. Moreover, merely human effort and labor do not suffice to acquire it, since a certain divine attraction is also necessary for its attainment. As is mentioned in the prophetic tradition, a single attraction from God outbalances all the efforts of the men and the jinn. Unquote. I absolutely love this hadith. And it's something that I have been trying to say in a very roundabout way on that theurgy list for a couple of years, where everybody is so desirous to acquire knowledge of how to conjure jinn to be their muwakkils, their personal metaphysical slaves, that they forget that whatever they seek, one attraction, one jazba from the all high outbalances and kind of, throws all of that in the wayside. Anyway, that's a different discussion. So these were the first 2 sections of this second ishraq of the wisdom of the throne. And now, as always, I open the floor to you all for whatever you want to talk about. Whoever wants to go, let's just jump in.
Hey Wahid, so I have a question really regarding not so much the soul as the body, and I can guess some of the answers maybe, but it seems to me that in this framework it could be looked at in 2 fundamental ways. You could see that the body is organically related to all these other levels of being, the soul. There's a kind of oneness underlying it all. And yet sometimes the language also lends itself to maybe a more matter spirit dualistic reading.
Yeah.
Is that off?
No, you're right. No, he does not do that. So, I mean, this is the way I re-articulate all of this. I think those 2 perspectives with Mulla Sadra and Ibn Arabi both have their place.
Mm.
On the one hand, to get into the Gnostic capital G kind of framework of exoriating matter and looking at matter as evil is a very problematic thing from the whole Neoplatonic perspective, in the way that the Gnostics frame it, right? Because
Right.
matter has its principle in the spirit itself, and never mind that it is an outcome of the universal matter itself. So from that perspective, the spirit, through these emanations of the worlds, experiences itself through that, that substantial reality. So there's no way we should exoriate it. The problem is that if a particular instantiation takes this experience as the summum bonum of its experience, rather than strive for the arc of return back to its principle, which is the kind of most of humanity, they're experiencing, and they think this is all there is, without even being cognizant in any sense, or intuitive in any sense, that there is also an arc of return involved in this experience as well, beyond itself. So this is where things get problematic. So when Mulla Sadra is exoriating matter, if we take it from a
No, he.
Oh, he's
there
back.
he is.
folks don't know what happened here. This has been a reoccurring problem again over the last couple of days, where the internet keeps going out in this area. Last week we had a flash flood, and apparently it damaged all the MBN cables, the cables that the national government administers for all of the internet. So I think they're repairing something up the street, but it just came back again. So anyway, my apologies. Let's let's get back to the point at hand that Nate was asking. So he was asking, why is there this whole dualitude between the exoriation and the kind of praising of the material experience in Mulla Sadra? So wherever he is condemning it, he is probably condemning it from that perspective, this common, Irfani perspective in Islam, about encouraging people to, traverse the arc of return. But from the bigger picture, the exoriation of matter is kind of a foolhardy, undertaking, because matter is part of the overall divine economy of existence itself. It's only when we don't realize that fact in itself where there are problems as such. But once this is realized, that in the bigger picture of things, that this material experience, this quantitative experience of matter, occurs in the greater trajectory of being, then naturally from that experience, then the arc of return is initiated by whoever understands this. And so there is no problem in looking at this issue from that perspective. I like especially the way that Mulla Sadra kind of frames this from one angle in the Aristotelian perspective of the intellectual, and then immediately in the next sentence transitions to a very Platonic kind of gloss and unpacking of what this means, more than most peripatetics would even, anticipate. So this is what I really like about him, that he is able to do that, and then infuse the next sentence with these sorts of Akbarian and Sufi ideas and Neoplatonic, very, ecstatic Neoplatonic concepts. Anybody else?
Yeah, so my question is maybe a bit naive. I don't know too much about Aristotelian psychology, but when he talks about this, these sort of developmental stages of the soul, how you've got, what is it? How you've got, like, I think he said, like, what are they? Sorry, I'm just trying to look it up. But he talks about these different stages of the soul, how it's first got corporal power, then a natural form, then there's a sensible soul, and all its levels. Are these like developmental stages, or are these stages that we go through when we're, I guess, living human beings? Or, sorry, when we're like developed egos?
Well, both. It would be both. It would be both at the same time. One is ontological and the other one is epistemological. And then the question I've had, that's more or less ever sort of answers in his Aspar to kind of a great extent, is that, well, even though the soul is traversing all these trajectories of being, what happens to those people who don't have that epistemological kind of awakening about the nature of being? Do their souls stunt? Do they just stop from making that next, the growth to the next stage of being? And he, like most Neoplatonists, seems to answer in the affirmative. That is the case. So that knowledge or gnosis is also hardwired into the ontological development of a given soul, so that your growth and your return to the source is all dependent on your knowledge of it.
Oh, that's pretty interesting.
Orban made this amazing statement in one of his books one time. He calls that gnosis is salvific knowledge. It's truly soteriological, more than what a religionist understands by that concept of salvation, because gnosis allows the soul to save itself, right? By whatever principle it accedes to that salvation, whether it be, by projecting it into a figure of a Messiah, Jesus, whatever, the Mahdi, whatever. But ultimately, it is the soul that experiences saving itself, and that is the salvation of it. So it's salvific, and that's such an apropos statement that he makes.
I actually have a kind of a pet theory about dementia and the phenomenon of dementia, which is I don't know what the situation looked like in previous generations, but I keep hearing about like an epidemic of dementia across like the Western world, which really is not surprising. And for me, that's my theory. What you just touched on there is the salvific nature of gnosis and that development that you're talking about. For me, that's what prevents the development of well, brain disease, for example, like dementia. Because I have a lot of dementia in my extended family, and just from my own personal observations, it seems like the ones that develop dementia are the ones who never developed, any epistemological or ontological, you know, stages of being. So that's all I wanted to say. I don't know if that might not be.
You have nailed it, bullseye on the head. I have thought along these lines for many years. So, one of the things I think about often is that a civilization is corrupted to the degree that it forgets. And this current civilization on a mass level is as forgetful and and its neglect comes from its forgetting as much as possible. I mean, we don't, I can't recall from my readings of world history any civilization that has been this, forgetful of its source, trapped in matter. I mean, it's like taking some of the Gnostic Gospels from Nag Hammadi and just literally, you can project some of the things that these really radically Gnostic texts talk about, the condition of being trapped, in this state. So I agree, and I agree. And one of the marks of this, I guess, is the manner in which this current humanity looks upon the natural world and the environment and the ecology of things, and how out of whack and out of balance it is, and how it looks upon this natural world as just this tabula rasa that it can exploit and destroy and form and shape at will. Whereas earlier civilizations really understood this principle that in order to survive, we have to be in some kind of a balance, and there is a sort of, we cannot eat our way and, use and utilize our way all the resources around us into something better. It just, we die as a result of that. And the one civilization that broke this rule that we know about, for example, the Mayans, ceased to exist as a result of this in Mesoamerica. I mean, this is the consensus amongst the people that the archaeologists that study Columbian civilization, that these people just expended themselves out of the resources, and what remained of the remnants of that civilization then later on went elsewhere and produced some of the other Mesoamerican civilizations. And we are literally, but on a planetary level, on the same track at this time. We are eating through our resources, and then the war and conflicts that are generated on the human plane are all around, who has the control and the final say over these resources. I mean, look at right now, this whole global tariff war that Trump ignited this week, that, is going to tank the U.S. economy very shortly. if it hasn't already. The stock market is just plunging and cratering by the day. But this is basically the bottom line. When you forget, this is what you become. And Protestant Christianity, which is the sort of the semi-official ideology of empire and has been since its inception, does not remember anything, because it is such a flatland interpretation of scripture and of spiritual truths, that it is materialism in the name of religion, more than anything else. And so it is no surprise, at least to me, that when you look at America and just the West in general over the last 300-400 years, that this is progressively where it has led it to. Now, I'm not saying Catholicism is any better. I mean, in many ways, they spawned all of this. They were responsible for it. The whole white supremacist ideology was one that the church literally fabricated out of thin air at the end of the Reconquista to justify it, and also to justify the emerging slave trade that the Portuguese and the Spanish initiated in North Africa. So, this is where it has led us. So, what will get us back? Well, obviously, what will get us back into gnosis rather than agnosis, which we are right now, is precisely these sorts of ideas, whether it be Mulla Sadra or the European equivalents, or the, shamanic and indigenous equivalents, which are all basically saying the same thing. But to me, what is very important, and this is where the ancient Gnostics, I think, kind of got it wrong, is this exoriation of matter. This is a real, this has always occurred to me as being completely counterintuitive. How can one return to God by completely exoriating matter and looking at it as the principle of evil? We can look at it, at matter and the universal nature, in the way that Ibn Arabi and Mulla Sadra explain it, as being the principle of duality, wherein the phenomena of evil occurs. But rather than being evil in itself, this is a really counterintuitive thing that the ancient Gnostics kind of latched onto, kind of mistaking their own social condition and the problem of the societies that they were living in, and then projecting it out into the cosmology and the ontology of things. This has been my criticism of Gnosticism for a long time. Whereas this perspective says, these things in themselves are neutral. It's the perspective that kind of projects that kind of value judgment on it, if you would. Which then takes us back again to the question of morality that Hussein and I were talking about last week.
Well, I think there's a fundamental lack of understanding of what matter is, first of all. I mean, first of all, science has it all wrong. And, nobody knows what matter is except for, perhaps Gnostics. And I'm not even sure that the Gnostics necessarily know what they're talking about when they talk about matter, because obviously it's a mystery, right? And it's hard to wrap your head around it completely. So I just wanted to say about the development of your noetic powers, or at least on a lower level, your regular intellectual powers, with regard to dementia and just becoming more and more cut off from the source. My motto is use it or lose it. That's all I wanted to say, is use it or lose it. Like I'm always telling people, read more, like do a puzzle, read a book, learn a song, do something where you're developing your powers.
This was actually, it's interesting you brought this up. This was a content of a conversation I had with one of my daughter's teachers this last week. Here in Queensland, every school, from grade 7 onwards is required to have a computer laptop in class. So all their teaching is happening with it's all digitized. And although some of their classes have a no AI rule, otherwise there's this very amorphous rule around AI, whether it's ChatGPT or all this, functionality that's coming with the very, programs with Microsoft, et cetera, that they're forcing these children to use. And my conversation with this teacher was, when we went to school, everything was done by hand. You guys had blackboards. Teachers had blackboards. Although, not everything was by rote, but there was a certain expectation that we were to know our material, even if we didn't completely understand it. But now what's happening is that even that is going out. And when these kids are being, exposed to artificial intelligence that can basically do all of their assignments for them, and all they're doing so they don't get caught for plagiarism or whatever is just basically reword whatever chat GPT, et cetera, is saying. How are we going to expect that in the next 20, 30 years, we're going to produce a person or an educated market, uneducated, that is just completely dysfunctional in so many areas that we didn't have a problem 20, 30 years ago? How do you, what's going to happen there?
I couldn't agree more. I've had that same conversation myself, and yeah, you're right. And I just wanted to spit out one more quick thing here, like with regard to technology, you're reminding me of like before computers, before Chat GPT, just the calculator. I remember when I was a kid, we did math, with a pencil and paper,
Yeah.
and the calculator was introduced during my lifetime, and I remember how that was kind of controversial because it made things too easy. If you could just punch in your calculations and not have to think about it, not have to work it out,
They would
well,
have,
then
I wasn't, I
the
wasn't
machine is
allowed
doing
to
the
have
work.
a calculator until the 11th grade. And only when we started doing in math, we were doing, algorithms and calculus. It was only then that they allowed us to have calculus. Before that, there was no, now year seven, kids have calculators. And I'm just like, you're giving them calculators at this young age. You're exposing them to the world of the internet and artificial intelligence that even we adults don't completely have our heads around quite yet.
Mhm.
What is the expectation for these people at the very top of the Department of Education? We're formulating these policies. What are they thinking? And his answer to me, he said, off the record, they're not. I agree
No,
with
they're
him.
not. No. And yeah, and one other example that you might find amusing is a simple device, a guitar tuner. They're
Yeah.
very popular now, electronic tuners, and everybody who plays a guitar has one. And when I started playing guitar, there were no electronic tuners. You had to tune it by ear, right? You had to listen to the pitch, and everything was done by your own ears. And then so when those tuners came out, I hated them because I had a couple of friends that didn't know how to tune by ear and they wanted to just turn on the electronic tuner and just zip, zip, zip right quick. I, I, I'd always be like, no, put that away. Do it by ear. You got to hear it. You have to hear it that it's in tune. You can't let a machine tell you it's in tune.
Mm.
Anyway, my point is there's a generation probably of guitar players who can't tune their guitar by ear. They need the machine to do it. And which to me is actually it's actually kind of ridiculous because you're talking about the whole point of playing a musical instrument is to produce music. And if your own ears can't differentiate the pitches and know the difference between something that's in tune and something that's out of tune, then you got a real problem. And you're
I've
anyway, I find it
asked,
funny. That's all.
I've asked this question from several musicians and I've gotten several different answers, but there seems to be a consensus. I want to get your opinion too. Do you think the computerization and digitization of music in general over the last 100 years or 50 years, has it degraded the talent and ability of musicians or has it augmented it?
Well, that's a really interesting question. Well, I don't think I could answer it. But just as a guess, I would say that every new technology that comes along that makes things easier and more convenient ultimately has a negative side effect to it in that it takes away from the natural development of natural skills and other powers that would that would be developed, if you weren't using the technology to make your life easier. I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, there's a lot of really good musicians. There was a point in my life where I thought that nobody's making anything original anymore. Nothing's good. Everything's been done, and the future of music is bleak. But I don't think that way anymore. There are lots of good musicians that are out there who are very creative, very original, And they're using all the latest gear, computers, and everything else, and yet somehow their creativity seems to be unhindered or unbothered by the technology. But then there's another class of people where the technology, it's actually overwhelming. With me personally, I'm not a professional musician. I've never been. One of my problems is I became really overwhelmed with the technology. I went and bought a bunch of stuff on loan that I still never really took advantage of because I just got bogged down and overwhelmed with learning all of the different programs and hardware and all this crap that actually doesn't have anything to do with creating music, really. I mean, it's, you know what I mean? Like, it's hard to explain that, but yeah, yeah, no, I don't know. I don't know. I think technology is a double-edged sword. It
Yeah,
makes things a lot better in some ways, but at the same time, it also is self-sabotaging if you rely on it and if I don't know if you lack anything in the first place in the creativity department.
got it. Got it. That's a good answer. That's sort of along the same lines of several other answers I've gotten. I mean, I've also talked to people who just, laud it, and to other people who just completely, um, dumped on it, that it's the worst thing. It's taking skill away. People's ears are degrading. They're having to rely more on the digital than themselves.
Yeah,
And one guy, he was also a guitarist, he pointed out, he said, like, if you compare, like, for example, the 60s, you had guitarists like Hendrix, who apparently, according to him, Hendrix never read sheet music. Everything he did, he
no,
was he was an ear musician, ear guitarist. Whereas
yeah,
Clapton, people like Clapton did read sheet music. And he said, someone like Hendrix came along, right, and just like pulled the rug from the feet of all the guitarists out there, and he couldn't read any sheet music. How many Jimi Hendrix have you known about over the last 20 years?
yeah,
Is it even possible to produce one at that level who's just been exposed to the technology rather than some guy sitting in a trailer somewhere, spending years and years and years just experimenting with the notes with himself without even, being able to read any sheet music. And I
yeah,
think he cited also Django Reinhardt, the gypsy guitarist. He said he
yeah.
couldn't read any sheet music either. And he was the greatest jazz guitarist that ever walked the face of the earth.
That's common. That's very common. I don't read sheet music. I could. I can. There's something called tablature. I can read that. That's something else, which is a dumbed down version of sheet music for guitarists. But when it comes to like actual regular standard notation, if you give me a sheet, I can figure it out. Like I can, figure it all out, but it'll take me a while. But I can't sight read. Like I can't read it, in real time. That's a skill that's a lot harder than it looks. And musicians who can do that, they're usually classical musicians
Yeah.
who are trained, who learn how to do that, like spend years developing that skill. And I'm always amazed when I watch a concert of classical musicians and they're playing the most phenomenal stuff, and they're not looking at their instruments. They're looking at a sheet, or a display, and they're even turning the pages, like play a note and turn the page right quick and keep playing and not miss a beat. It blows my mind. I don't know how they do it, but yeah, that most people can't do that.
Mm.
Most musicians can't do that, I would say. And so, yeah, it depends on the person. It depends on the person. Hendrix obviously was a special person. You're going to have not everybody's the same, obviously, in terms of aptitude and in terms of their creativity. So, yeah, the answer to the question really depends on the person. But me, like, I have an electric tuner, but I don't use it. If I pick up my guitar, I can't remember the last time I touched my tuner. I just use my ear because how I started and that's how I prefer to do it. So, but not everybody's like me. All of my friends prefer to use their tuner. So I guess, yeah, it depends on the person, and I don't know what you're familiar with in the first place, how you get started. But
Okay.
yeah, I kind of have a dim view on technology. I feel like there's too much. Every time I try to do anything, like I'm not working on any projects, and it's just too much. Like there's no time. It would fill up my whole day just to set up, like just get everything tickety-boo the way that I want it so that I could start a project. And yeah, I don't like technology. I'm the kind of person that the simpler the better because I'm OCD. I get overwhelmed easily. You give me
Got it.
too much stuff, too many details to manage, and I have a tendency to just shut down into procrastination mode.
Mozart apparently was the opposite of that. There's a famous scene in that film Amadeus where he's criticized of generating too many notes by the Prince of Austria. Maximilian
I, I
accuses him
haven't seen it.
No, that was fun. That was funny.
yeah.
Too many
I
notes.
wonder I wonder
Right.
though if all this technology would make us feel so dehumanized if it weren't being used to actively subjugate people and threaten them with replacement. Because I work in telecommunications, and for me, AI is always hovering over my head. They're constantly trying to automate things. And well and good, I can see the good uses of it. But if you automate the human out of the equation entirely, the only people who benefit are capital, the owning
Yeah.
class. They contribute absolutely nothing. They create nothing.
There's
And that's
another
a whole different scenario.
there's another problem. I'm sure you probably know this better than anybody, is that computer era is far more destructive than human era. Human era um, can replicate itself, but at some point, certain humans realize, okay, we made a mistake here. Let's go fix it. We, walk ourselves back. But if a computer era occurs, it just keeps going, just like in an endless sequence loop, until
Yeah.
someone either pulls a plug over on the program or, whatever. What do
Yeah.
you think about that?
Yeah, if you don't catch a process that's run amok, it can wreak havoc downstream.
Yeah.
And it's very rare that the automation has the built-in logic to catch and correct that.
Mm.
It's not saying that it doesn't happen, but the human part of the equation is invaluable. And what it seems to me is being done is the systems that govern this planet are trying to make it so that they have just enough of those people under their control and they can automate the rest of us out of existence.
Yeah. In other words, we need all the Sarah Connors that we can get in the face of this bloody Terminator,
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I hate to say it because I'm not a knee-jerk Luddite, but there needs to be some kind of brakes put on how capital is deploying this technology.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Amen to that. You better believe it. Yeah. This is some of the stuff that Peter Lamborn Wilson and I used to talk about a lot, about that. Because I would ask, why don't you get a computer? It makes life more easier, it makes your writing easier. Get online, you can communicate with people, all these people that love you. Nope, I'm not doing it. Here's the reason. And you just said exactly what you just said.
Yeah, there are reasons I gravitated toward him as a teenager, and now that I'm older in my 40s, I'm starting to realize a lot of his attitudes were right.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, you're 100% correct. I totally agree. Definitely. Anybody else is here from Hossein or anybody else?
Okay,
Um,
I'll take.
no,
Go on.
no, go ahead. Go ahead. Hassan. No, I'll start to think.
Uh, okay, just little follow-up from the conversation till the moment. Uh, because based on everything we said, it will be very easily concluded that technology and technological process as a whole in the all of the human history, it is something which is evil and it is bad. And a person will very easily come to the conclusion that just go back to the nature. That's the only truth. Uh, But I always wonder where is the middle, the golden middle between the two extremities, because this
Sure.
attitude will be very easily
Manipulated. Yeah, I know.
employed by
Yeah,
persons who are just stupid and lazy, and they
yeah.
hate everything which is
Yes.
new. So
True.
a
Let me,
type of
yeah.
bad
Okay.
traditionalism which opposed to the
Let me. Okay. I don't hate technology. I don't hate modernity, but we have to recognize there is an imbalance. Okay. And this imbalance is actually very apropos to what we just read in that first section of the second is strong, is that when, like we said, when there's forgetting, when there is agnosia or amnesia, right? A given soul fixates on what is in front of it. So collectively, this humanity is now exclusively focused on the technology, the material technology that is constantly developing, right? But that technology is also being generated by human minds from a realm of the intelligible that is beyond the material, right? But people forget this, that, it's that human mind is part of a greater string that is beyond the material world, right? So it's not the technology in itself that is evil or the matter that is evil. It is the fixation on it exclusively beyond its various principles, beyond itself, that becomes the problem, such that then things like balance are no longer understood, responsibility are no longer understood. And then when you translate this all into the realm of economics, just what Nate just said, more and more and more the conversation is about entire industries that are going to be made redundant by artificial intelligence. So millions of people over the next 10, 15, 20 years are going to be out of work because artificial intelligence is going to literally take over their job, automation and artificial intelligence together. And that is very dangerous and very evil to the people who are in those industries right now. So, but then the question is this technology infallible? And can it even be made to be infallible or even close to it? And more or less, the question is usually no. So then the necessity of including the human in this, in this economic paradigm doesn't necessarily go away. But then the fixation, unfortunately, the overall collective fixation is still on the material world. There's a forgetting. I'm not saying I'm not saying either the material world is bad or technology is bad in and of itself. I think that kind of attitude is wrong because it's sort of then rejecting the immediate, and I don't believe that one should reject the immediate. This is one of the issues, bones of contention that I have with the neo-traditionalists and Guénon specifically, because they have a tendency of doing that and then projecting a golden age into the past, and everything we got here is bad and muck and this. My perspective is, and especially from what Mulla Sadra's, the whole perspective of Mulla Sadra's transubstantial motion, is that God is as much the post-eternal as it is the the post in the future as the pre-eternal in the past, right? So to constantly look to the past and say, oh, how great it was and how bad it is now, I think in a sense is not, besides sentimentally being an ungrateful attitude, it's a very misguided approach to things, right? Technology is good, can be great. It has facilitated a lot of things. It has made, even in some degree, I would say, even the life of certain spiritual seekers and Gnostics easier, right? But the Gnostic has a focus, and that focus is not the technology. To the Gnostic, technology is not God. It's just a tool, a technique, and that's it. No more, no less, right? But to the mass of humanity, right, this technique itself has become God. and is replacing that. And it's contributing, therefore, to the further entrenchment of the forgetfulness and the amnesia. And that is the problem that we need to fix. That is the imbalance. Because also this imbalance is infringed into the world of nature and the ecological balance of things, which daily is just unleashing mayhem on this planet. I mean, I'm living in a place, I mean, here in Southeast Queensland, we just went through in the last month a cyclone, a hurricane, then a flash flood that came on its heels about 10 days later. And on it goes. And you see it, when you walk outside the door here, branches and trees falling down on the ground. They're still, collecting stuff, power cables still being fixed, and, et cetera, et cetera. And all of this comes from the attitude of forgetfulness, that amnesia, and as Jeff said, it's no wonder that in this time, you're having these incidents amongst the mass of people of these various, sort of medical and cognitive disorders, where it literally people are forgetting. Their brains are beginning to unravel, not just from an emotional level, but from a literal biochemical level. That they can't function. So Parkinson's disease and all the rest of it that we're experiencing this time. Whereas I'm not saying that these diseases and mental disorders and cognitive problems didn't exist previously, but not on this scale that we're experiencing today.
Yeah, it seems to me that the archetype of our age is the Quran's Pharaoh, and Elon Musk and people like him are exactly fitting into that archetype.
To the glove, absolutely. To the team, yeah.
Because I believe that we could use technologies like AI and automation to provide everybody's basic material needs and manage our resources more efficiently and ecologically, but that's not what's happening.
No. But technology and the people or the producers of it are saying literally to all of us, "Ana rabbikum a'la," I am your Lord the Most High. It's telling everybody, and everybody's believing it. You see it. I mean, I can't get on public transport here without a single head turning while I get into either a train or a bus, because everybody is just like this. Whereas 20 years ago, that wasn't the case. You walked into a bus or a train and everybody would start to look at you. Now nobody even notices your existence.
Exactly.
Okay. Another question somehow related to the conversation when you have talked about gnosis, which is the knowledge which saves the soul, that it is the most important and primary thing to a human. Then I recall the all dispute amongst the mutakallimun. Is faith enough for a man to be safe, iman in the Arabic word, or faith, iman, it is not enough if you don't have the right actions, the amal.
Well, it
Now,
depends. It depends what the definition of iman is. As you know, in our own sources, in the Shia sources, the definition of iman is not the way that everybody else takes that definition. The definition of iman with us is ma'rifah, right? And this is the reason why the imams in this hadith corpus make this separation between the Ahmad, the generality, who they call Muslimun, the submitters, and the Mu'minun, who are their initiates, really, which such that there's like a gulf between the Muslimun, the submitters, and the Mu'minun. So that iman, they're already saying, is marifah, which is salvific. Yeah.
Yes, because this ma'rifah, it is such deep knowledge that it is embedded in the soul, and by virtue of that, it is salvific. Okay. No, the next one. Uh, it is in the comment of the translator
Yeah.
about the words of Mulla Sadra. That big amount of the philosophers, they have wronged what is exactly the nature of the soul, each stage, and so on, because to know proper about the soul, you need the prophecy, the direct connection with the revelation, God, the active intellect. So you will understand the soul. Of if you are not such high level that you have this direct revelation from God, that will help you to understand the nature of the soul and its intricacies, then at least you can be guided and helped by the divine revelation in the form of different ayat and ahadith.
Mhm.
And now, here, where is my question and my problem? That first of all, you should decipher in the correct way what is the underlying meaning of this ayat and ahadith. So the problem still stands. That is the first thing I have problem with. And the second thing is that usually when the different philosophers or Sufis and so on, they apply some of the ayat and ahadith to prove their points of view. It is somehow very chaotic and not systematic because they stress, let's say, one, two, or three different ayahs from the Quran, and uh, yes, it is very beautiful how they explain the things, but it is just not systematic. I'm not saying that they are wrong, but that is my whole problem with the Quranic interpretation. Because if you look how, for example, Plotinus or Proclus, they interpret the dialogues of Plato, they knew what it is all about, the whole thing. But when we look at the Quranic Mufassirun and in what way they are interpreting Quran, you just see that they are just speculating and almost not anything essentially about the core message.
Um, this is a great question, and it's also a very complex question, and very many different answers that can be given to this. But let's put it this way. One of the complaints of all the Ahl Zahir, the exotericists, towards whether we're talking Sufis, philosophers, Batanis, whatever, is that all of you guys, this is their accusation that all of you guys are engaging in tafsir b'ray. You're only interpreting based on your own opinion. And their proof for this is that, from one arif or from one, philosoph to the next, from one botany to the next, there's a different interpretation. Whereas with us, when we're interpreting the Quran, we're giving the asbab and nuzul, the circumstances of the revelation, yada yada, and this is what the intention is, and there's nothing further to this, you know. But here's the problem. The problem, at least from the Shia perspective, from the original integral Shia perspective, number one, the way that the official mufassirun, which were all mostly Sunnis, because that is whole genre of tafsir in the way that is popularly known, it was initiated by them, whereas with the imams, they would give tafsirs, but their tafsirs were very different than the kind of tafsirs that we then witness from the Sunnis. The problem is that from the integral original Shia idea, we don't have the integral Quran, because this was a text that was cobbled together in one format during the Caliphate of Uthman. And then, that version was very different than the version that we have today. There was the, different codices of the Quran, even into the first generations of the Abbas. And then finally, this text was codified and vocalized in the way that we have today, irrespective of the fact that there are 7 and more ahruf readings of the Quran, even existent simultaneously to the one we have. Whereas the Shia read it in one way, the Sunnis read it, and the other schools read it another way. So that is the problem, So, and this is the reason why I believe, one of the reasons why in the second or third generations of the Abbasids, you had suddenly such an insistence that didn't exist before historically of the Quran being coeval with God and sanctifying the Quran to such a level that it did not enjoy previously. Because from a political angle, beyond the theological, let's leave the theological on one level, but from the political, the amorphousness of the Quran previously, whether in terms of its vocalization or its structure or its, whether certain verses were taken in it or taken out of it, or whether they were written in a certain way or another way, all of these things had plagued the Ummah until that point. And then all of a sudden, orthodoxy or the establishment has had enough. And out of the blue comes this whole doctrine of the uncreatedness of the Quran. And on the back of the uncreatedness of the Quran comes this insistence of, everybody else's reading is BS. These are the only accepted 7 readings. Any other readings are shirk, kufr, ilhad, and rafida, and all of the rest of this stuff. And here we are today. So that is why I'm saying that on the one hand, study of these texts are important because it also reminds people to return back to the history of the text. The history of the Quran is not the way that either the two Orthodox camps have claimed it to be. And alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, we now have the scholarship today at the hands of people like Mu'ezzi and Kohlberg and all the rest of these people who've been looking at this stuff for the last 30, 40 years, that is now beginning to prove this with analysis and texts and manuscripts and studies and conferences and one thing. This is one thing that I think modern scholarship is doing an immense service to, which is breaking this talmud of orthodoxy, right? So that doesn't mean that, that these people are necessarily challenging the validity of Islam, but they are challenging the validity of these hand-me-down, socially constructed ideas that have been acting and plaguing the Ummah for the last 1,000 years, right? And straitjacketed the Ummah in a very narrow-minded way of looking at the world. These are very good. This is very liberatory, in my opinion. So come back to your question, for the normal believer who obviously hasn't spent all their life studying all of this stuff, whether the tafsir literature or the hadith and sirah, and then gone and looked at Western academic scholarship and tried to formulate their own opinion about what these Quranic ayat mean, it is understandable that the notion of iman is going to be very primitive, right? So, and unfortunately, then these people are then liable to be herded and corralled into particular circles and in particular ways of being in subcultures who are very straitjacketed and all the rest of it that we know. But this doesn't change the fact that if this is revelation, then it means that it is always present, and its presence is multifaceted, and its multifacetedness has a infinity of meanings and applications that are applicable to the moment in which that meaning has been called by a particular Gnostic or philosopher and whatnot. Just something that even Arabi spends page after page after page of the Futuhat al-Makkiyah reminding us in a variety of different ways. And this is why I think it is more important, in my opinion, to approach scripture in that kind of fluid kind of way that these characters do, than not, right? Because, ironically, it was one of the very close allies of Ayatollah Khomeini, just right after revolution, that got on the pulpit and gave this amazing khutbah one time, where he was being, there was accusations from some of the ulama in Qom as why are these comparisons being made between Hussein and Karbala and the people of Palestine. And he was very incensed, and he says, well, honestly, let's be very frank. What do Hussein and Karbala have to do with us legitimately, tangibly, materially at this moment when you have Hussein's and Karbalas happening right next door to us at this very moment? And so he said that the association that people make with these sacred tropes on one level oftentimes have a deeper resonance to that archetype of Hussein and Karbala when something analogous is happening. And in this way, his argument was kind of designed to, shut up some of these reactionary clerics who are really incensed about, at that time, Iran's focus about Palestine and of the Palestinian. But that, in my opinion, is a good answer. It doesn't negate the archetypal reality of this. It doesn't negate, the status of Hussein and the martyrs of Karbala at all. But what it says, what has it got to you? I mean, this is just an idea that you have. You weren't there, but yet there is something analogous happening right in front of us that is just that very thing. And you people don't even want to look at it, So I think this is a beautiful argument. So going back to your question, if you cannot deal with the immediacy of that revelation in your own situation, what good is the tafsir that gives you the asbab nuzul, trying to talk about an event in the past that has only a intellectual connection with you and nothing more?
And just to summarize in one sentence what I get. In some sense, it is there is no point to try to present the whole Quran as one holistic thing, because it is just not that, for all the reasons you have said. And the more successful approach, at least which works for me, just take the symbol or the single ayah, which I feel very deeply at the moment, and try to extract everything I am able to extract from it, just ignoring the rest of the Quran, which is not directly speaking to me at the moment.
But hold on, just hold on. Just remember, recall from our readings of Ibn Arabi, what is the definition of the Quran according to him? The definition of the Quran is not from qara'a, not from to recite. It's from qarana, to unite. So with this school, with this Akbari school, and this also includes Mulla Sadra, Quran is not necessarily the book. Quran is the totality of things that unite. Whereas the criterion, al-Furqan, that is the revelation or the book and all of the hadith and all the rest of it, which is then gets very specifically defined in that term in the bayan. But even with all of these Gnostics, that sort of is already resonating, especially with the way that Ibn Arabi deals with this in such creative ways that he did, that the Quran is not just a physical book, even though it's called that. It's far more than that. So such that he never says this overtly, but when you read the Futuhat al-Makkiyah in some of the places, it is as if Ibn Arabi is claiming his own Futuhat al-Makkiyah to be the Quran in several places, right? And he sort of suggests, he doesn't say this, the Bab actually explicitly said this, but Ibn Arabi says, insinuates that the Quran can spill off of its pages, that it's not just the what we have written in the two covers of the book that are the Quran, that the Gnostic is the Quran, in a sense. He is the living Quran, because the Quran lives through the Gnostic, right? And so the Quran can speak through the Gnostic. And so if that is the case, and he doesn't phrase it in this way, but he implies it very strongly with his own words, then therefore even what he's saying is the Quran. in the denotation that he gave about that which unites, the karana. These are
I think
radical
it's in.
ideas. No, go ahead.
I think it's in Surat al-Kahf where the ayah is, "If the seas were ink for the words of my Lord." That's sort of what that evoked in me.
Absolutely true. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So this is the great part about the book, is that the book itself rebukes these orthodox straitjacketed, ideas about itself.
Yes, that's the thing what I was trying to say from the very beginning. When you read what their explanation, tafsir, and so on, it is so ridiculous. It is just obvious. These people do not understand anything.
But this is
And because
because
for
this is,
example,
what the problem is, Hassan. The problem is, and this is a tendency that all humans have, irrespective of age, is this tendency of formalizing everything, right? Everything has to be formalized to be palatable and understandable. And this is precisely that materialist mentality that doesn't want to look beyond its principle. That is just fixated in what is in front of it, the material world, and can't see anything else beyond it. The principle of all of it. That's what that is.
okay, Sadie, you answered my question beyond. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So the last sentence. So here the Quran, as you were saying, it is not so much what is written in the book, but what happens in your own soul.
Yeah.
Do you feel it? Do you?
Yeah.
If it doesn't happen in your soul, it is not Quran. Even you have the
No.
whole book.
No.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Hussein.
Well, just a comment on that. I was just having a conversation with my mom the other day, and Imam Hussein came up, and I remembered I guess it's a hadith that says, "Kulli yawma Ashura, kulli ard Karbala," right? And then I was trying to explain basically like Henri Corbin's concept of hiero-history to her. I was like, that's basically what it is. I had a professor once he claimed that like almost none of the Quran is actually historically verifiable, which would support the idea that of sacred history, that these are events that are always taking place, and it's not meant to be a record of history. I just had a
It occurs in the plane of the soul, But the other thing, it's interesting. It's interesting you bring this up. One thing that occurs to me the other day, this is just an idea. I mean, it's probably fraught with a lot of problems, but let me put it out there. If we take the Quran's notion of the abrogation of one scripture from one dispensation to the next, in one sense, we can even assert that from one dispensation to the next, on that plane of our history, there's a recreation of narratives going on. Right? So that even, with the dispensation of the Quran, all of the hand-me-down narratives that the Quran may have received from the Old and New Testament, by definition, it completely tweaked, rejecting certain elements, introducing all other elements, wherein this in itself then becomes a sort of sirat. So rather than all these arguments between Christians, Jews, and Muslims about the trueness of the narrative, this is where the Harmonia Abrahamica then becomes even more interesting, such that the claim of the Quran is not even about the historicity of any of this stuff, in the sense that most literalists are looking for, because you can't find a single a speck of evidence for anything asserted in the Bible, even New or Old Testaments either. So on another level, if we're taking it from the point of higher history, perhaps one of the points of every dispensation is precisely to recraft these sacred narratives of higher history from one dispensation to the next.
Does and I don't want to open a can of worms here, but does the Bayan do the same thing with the Quran?
100%. Re-articulate from the very first public work that the Bab put forth is commentary in the Surah of Joseph. Yeah. Yeah.
Is the Bayan available in English translation online, or is it just abridged?
Their abridged translation. What I'm going to do, I'm going to put a full translation of Unities 1 to 11 of the Arabic Bayan pretty shortly, probably next 3 to 4 months.
Okay.
What I'm going to do is probably going to take most of my annotations out of this because this thing has ballooned. And then the Persian Bayan by me is coming, and I mean, I finished both books, as you know, both the Arabic and the Persian. So eventually, we make it a holistic Bayan in both its Persian and Arabic. And because I'm getting this from a lot of people, the Baha'is and what they put out are not to be relied upon. Their translations are either extremely, narrow and don't have those kinds of nuances, or they're just completely deceptive deliberately because they're trying to redirect to their own sectarian narrative about their own claims. So, and I think there's a real requirement out there for a good translation of both of these. And a lot of people are asking me, so I think this is going to be done. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had a conversation with a Baha'i who was really knowledgeable about Babi or Bayani topics. And I have a feeling that's been an attitude that's inculcated in them.
Yeah, they're not encouraged to be. I mean, the way that they pass it over, this is Baha'u'llah abrogated this, so we don't need to deal with this. It's all about Baha'u'llah. Right. We have to fix it. Baha'u'llah, and then I mean, I'm not very impressed. Even though I was born into a Baha'i household, I was never impressed with this guy. And because I find him to be kind of a sort of sanitized and whitewashed, but then popularized version of Sufism. So why do we need this guy if we already have Ibn Arabi? And what was new about anything? And it says in Baha'i, say, well, he brought the unity of humankind. Well, but we have that in the Quran.
We do.
In the first
I read his tablet of the Seven Valleys, and it's really a recapitulation of pre-existing Sufi ideas.
Yeah, Attar, this Conference of the Birds. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Just a summary of Attar's Conference of the Birds, which I think is a profound text, the Conference of the Birds. And the way that he puts all of this out, he talks about each valley, but then there are stories within stories within stories within each of these valleys that really flesh out the meaning of what these valleys are about. Whereas with Baha'u'llah, it's a very summary, it's a very short work, and he just kind of goes through a few pages and describing each valley and then goes to the next and ends up in the Fana and Baqa. And his notion of Fana and Baqa is very standard, but he doesn't really get into the phenomenology of what that even means,
Right, yeah, exactly. Like I didn't get the sense that I was being initiated into any mystery through that text. It was more like a survey.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, that's essentially what it is. So my question to these people is, well, why this claim to world religion and the religion that is the greatest thing since sliced bread, when all of these teachings have already existed and in better frameworks.
Yeah.
Deeper, initiatic ones. Yeah.
It also seems a little strange to me that you would have this momentous event of the Bab and the Bayan, and then only decades later you would gloss over it entirely.
Yeah.
I would seem to me that you would want to build the connection out if you were doing something really remarkable, but they're not doing that.
They're not doing it, and that's why I'm here to bring that all back. But in a new framework, because there are, I will admit, there are things in the Bayan that just don't work for today. They have no application for today. The mentality was that of a mentality of a 19th century Shiite, and the world has radically shifted from that paradigm, even in its own region. So none of these things work.
Right.
But the gnosis and esotericism of the Bayan, the Bab and Sopa Azal, is profound. It's multi-layered. It's deeply Shiite, and Akbarian simultaneously. So this is another thing the Baha'is don't like to bring up, is the shadow of Ibn Arabi and his school on their thinking and on Babism as a whole. I have no problem in admitting and celebrating it overtly, because I think it's very important, a figure like Ibn Arabi or even Mulla Sadra. These are profound thinkers, and on one level, one can even take these figures as being, someone analogous to, ad hoc prophets in some sense, because the wisdom is so deep and genuine and multifaceted and multi-applicable, that we must give these people their due, especially someone like Ibn Arabi or even Rumi, and many of these awliya, they, in many ways, a lot of Muslims and even some Sufis don't like to hear this, but without the mystical dimension of Islam and its philosophical dimension, it is arguable that this tradition would have even survived on the onslaughts that it faced, whether from Christendom and then from the Mongols. But it was this, this vibrancy, this nur that these figures and their ideas infused into it, that has kept this ship steady for as long as it has. And I think this must be acknowledged and recognized fairly.
I mean,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So, exoteric Muslims don't like to hear this, but I look at all of these figures as a kind of a continuing prophecy of Muhammad. I mean, I look at Ibn Arabi as a veritable Muhammad in his own right. Yeah. Now, these are controversial ideas, but they have to be spoken, nevertheless.
No, agreed. But it seems to me early generations of Muslims never shied away from difficult topics, but later generations of Muslims not so much.
And now people are getting intellectually lazy, and you see this everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I just wanted to
go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to share I want to share something. I was chewing on a thought. I read a little bit ahead in Sadra, and I'm reading a little bit of Christian Jambé, so I have but I'm thinking still about the soul, and for Sadra, because the soul is identical to its perceptions. When we talk about the substantial motion of the soul, and we talk about the births of the soul, that's how Jambé puts it, the multiple births of the soul, from sensible or from natural to sensible to imaginal to intelligible. There's, along with the birth of each birth of the soul, there's it seems that all of the things that the soul knows are also resurrected.
Yes,
because the soul is its
yeah.
Perception. The perceiving is the perceived.
Yeah.
It's just an interesting idea, and I think there's a kind of analog to it in the peripatetic tradition in Ibn Sina, or in Al-Farabi, where if you get from the potential intellect to the actual and acquired, there has to be this. For them, they put it in terms of abstraction of forms, and then once the forms are in the intellect, then it can reflect on itself. But there is this, and joined to the agent intellect, there's a sense of having to know everything about the world, or at least just integrate all of the forms of the world itself, even if it's cashed out in terms of quiddity instead of wujud, as it is in Sadra, and this idea of the unity of the forms already with with the intellect. But it's just a really interesting idea when I think about it, the practical implications, because when we think of the epistrophe of the soul, like that turning inward of the soul away from the outside towards the imaginal forms, and then turning even further into the intelligible, there's a simultaneous epistrophe of all of the things in the world it's perceiving.
Yes.
So you can it seems you can go both ways. You can have some, or it has to be both. It's at the same time as the soul is going inward, the entire world is getting turned inward.
Even
so
Adam
that's just something
has this little tidbit that he talks about one of his own experiences, which I think touches on what you just said, where there was a point where he felt himself become a sphere, and with the ability, and he was seeing everything as a sphere. Well, if there was a sphere which was an eye that had the capability of seeing everything simultaneously, he attained that station. But that sphere was not just seeing outward, it was also seeing simultaneously inward at the same time. So this outward side was its inward side in all directions, right? And that is exactly what you just described, this situation of the soul in its epistrophe.
Yeah. So thinking about just some practical implications, it seems that like in terms of like spiritual practices, anything that allows us to like group our sensible perceptions into imaginal categories, and so I think of like I've been reading a lot of James Hillman again. He's one of Carl Jung's students, and then Corbin was he was working with Corbin, but he has a whole thing. He even calls it epistrophe. For him, it's like we want to trace the qualities, the aesthetic qualities of everything in the world back to archetypes, so back to gods. And there's different ways of doing that, different kinds of archetypal images and mythological systems that one could use, or even just sacred history that we were talking about, that looking at something like that's happening in Palestine and actually tracing it back to Hussein and Karbala, right? That's a kind of epistrophe, not of what the soul is perceiving out there. So it just brings up for me, like, what are the different techniques that one could use as in addition to like just dhikr and
the fikr, the tafakkur is very important. This is a conversation I've had with many people. People say we think of dhikr, we recite it, and nothing happens. And I said, well, what do you do after that? Well, we just go about our business. So, well, are you thinking about the issues that arise from the meaning of that dhikr? And I said, no, we never thought about it that way. Well, then what are you doing? When you practice zikr, not only are you practicing it at that moment that you recite the name, but in some ways, you're also required afterwards to reflect on the meaning of that name and the implications of the world around you, whether in the moment or in the contents of memories that come to you from the past, or what you've been doing, events, that sort of thing. Such that this is then, the zikr is the vehicle that is constantly being recited, whether in a formal recitation or in a in a kind of a noetic recitation after the recitation itself. So it resonates. This is the practice. This is what the tafakkur is all about. So then you're mindful. You're always in the presence of that name, whether you're reciting it or whether you're thinking about the implications of the name in relation to what is going on around you. So this is what you do. If you can train your mind to think in those terms, this is how you deal with them.
My practice of dhikr of the Arabic names of God, I think, is not as, I feel like my access to it is not as easy as it is with something like even like a Greek mythological system or something like that. But there's because the names, at least for me, they have, like, one can imagine the letters, and I guess you can do like a letters calculation and that kind of thing. But that's, I guess maybe those would be like what Iamblichus calls, because Iamblichus has like a hierarchy of symbols. Like there's material and there's imaginal and there's intellectual, and like I think the names for him are like up higher. So maybe that's what it is that they're.
I mean, the
They are
sky's the limit. I mean, one of the exercises that you can do with all of these different names is to take their letters and extract other names from each of the letters. So let's take Allah. So Allah has 4 letters: Aleph, Lam, Lam, Ha. You can take, the first Aleph as Awal or Ahad, the first Lam as Latif, the second Lam as Layub, the essence, and then the Ha as Hadi. And so then you're not only contemplating the single name of Allah, but you're also contemplating all these different names that you can potentially extract in a letterist exercise. But with tafakkur itself, and thinking in terms of Greek mythology or mythology in general is great. But what you can also do is take those mythos of these ancient cultures and try to discover a name that may be associated with each of these various archetypes from the ancient world. Yeah, that's fine, even if they're Greek mythology or, I don't have a problem with that. This is all phenomena in which the divine presence inhabits.
That's really helpful. I mean, just one example I can think of is in Ibn Arabi's cosmology, he assigns names to the different degrees of generational being, like the different planetary spheres and everything. So, okay.
Yeah, you can do that with mythology. Why not? Who says you can't do that? You can do that. Why not?
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. All right, folks. Even with that
Wait a sec.
Go ahead.
I was going to chime in one more time, if I may.
Go for it. All right, go for it.
I know we're an hour and a half already, but this will be quick. I just wanted to ask you, I'm assuming, like, I just looking at the notes, the footnotes, and just want to make sure that I got that right. The word al-mad, I'm assuming that the word Mahdi is derived from al-mad. Is that right?
No. Mahdi is derived from the word Hadi and Huda, guidance. So the Mahdi is the one guided.
Okay.
The one who has Hidayah, the one who has guidance. That's what the meaning of Mahdi is.
Okay. Good. I'm glad I asked you, because I was making like a just a visual connection and made an assumption based on that, which was an incorrect assumption. So thank you.
You're welcome. No problem.
And the only other thing I wanted to say, this is kind of related to what Hassan was talking about, and I loved this in the footnotes, so I just wanted to point it out. If I can get it back, the difference between Sadra makes a distinction between a light and a lantern. I just wanted to say I love that. So Hassan, I don't know if you read the footnotes, but I think it's relevant to your question. You've got the light and then you've got lanterns. And so the book, the scriptures, that's not the light. It's you can get some light out of it, but anyway, that's all I wanted to say, really.
Great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Folks, just let's read the next 2 sections of this second Ishraq for next week. And obviously, we'll meet back here at the same time. Again, what I'm going to do, because there's a break in these 2 videos, I'm just going to first, put them all both together, and then I'll upload them. And for the YouTube version, obviously it's voice, so it's going to be easier to put those two versions together. But it may take a while, so give me a couple of hours before I upload these to the Telegram group. All right,
Sounds good.
everybody, be well. Until next week, have a good week. Yallah.
Yeah.